And let me just say this to demonstrate what I'm talking about, okay? You guys know what it's like. Have you experienced this, where the idea of, I need to pray today because it's my duty? God commands me to, I want to obey, and so I need to pray, I got to schedule time, versus this, I can't wait to pray today. I need His presence. I need to beseech Him. I need Him to fill me. I'm feeling weak, I'm feeling beat down, but what He says in His Word is, His strength is made perfect in our weakness. And He's waiting for our humility, and He's waiting for our weakness to fill us with His presence. Do you get down on your knees and say, Lord, I need You to show up today. I need You to do something. Change me, Lord. That You would use me to change this community. By way of that, I want to read a passage to you that I mentioned last week. And if you'll just listen carefully to this passage, okay? I hope it'll stir your hearts and express how important our prayer and fasting is this week. Okay. Matthew chapter 11, verses 20 through 30, okay? Just listen carefully as I go through this passage. Matthew 11, 20 through 30. Jesus is hardcore. Then Jesus began to denounce the towns where He had done so many of His miracles, because they hadn't repented of their sins and turned to God. What sorrow awaits you, Chorazin and Bethsaida? For if the miracles I did in you had been done in wicked Tyre and Sidon, their people would have repented of their sins long ago, clothing themselves in burlap and throwing ashes on their heads to show their remorse. I tell you, Tyre and Sidon will be better off on Judgment Day than you. And you people of Capernaum, will you be honored in heaven? No. You will go down to the place of the dead. For if the miracles I did for you had been done in wicked Sodom, it would still be here today. I tell you, even Sodom will be better off on Judgment Day than you. At that time, Jesus prayed this prayer. O Father, Lord of heaven and earth, thank You for hiding these things from those who think themselves wise and clever, and for revealing them to the childlike. Yes, Father, it pleased You to do it this way. My Father has entrusted everything to Me. No one truly knows the Son except the Father, and no one truly knows the Father except the Son, and those to whom the Son chooses to reveal Him. Then Jesus said, Come to Me, all you who are weary and carry heavy burdens, and I will give you rest. Take My yoke upon you. Let Me teach you, because I am humble and gentle at heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For My yoke is easy, and the burden I give to you is light. What do we see going on in this passage? Here's the idea. There are some places that are harder of heart than others. I could make a pretty strong case that Madison Heights is pretty hard. In fact, someone made the observation recently to me that, hey, how come there's so many people from outside of Madison Heights that come here? Detroit, Hazel Park, Ferndale, Oak Park. Where's the people from Madison Heights? So Jesus is letting us know that some places are harder of heart than other places. But then Jesus goes on to say that it's up to the Father, it's up to God, it's up to Jesus who He will reveal Himself to. He can reveal, no one in fact can find the Father unless the Father chooses to reveal Himself to that person. But then Jesus goes on to say that, hey, is really referring to His goodness, how He really is. Yeah, it's true that no one can find the Father unless the Father reveals Himself to that person. But is God good? Is He desiring to reveal Himself? Yes. So what it behooves us to do is cry out to God that He would do what He's already desiring to do. We need to use our prayers this week to break up the hardened hearts, the hard ground, that the seeds of the gospel could take deep root in our community. One of the most important things we can do for our city, for our community, for our neighborhoods, for our church, for our family, is to pray, to cry out to God. Do you think if all of us crying out to God together, God's going to say, no, I'm a little busy? Is he too inconvenienced to pour out his grace and his mercy, to reveal himself? Not in the, hey, I want to argue my way. I'm so persuasive that I can talk you into being a Christian. I'm not talking about that. Not by might, nor by power, but by my Spirit, saith the Lord. Do we want to see God do something supernatural in this community and use us to do it? Absolutely. So I plead with you, Gospel Life, spend some time in prayer this week. Know that you're not praying alone. Know that it's us as a family corporately praying out to God, and then we can sit back knowing that we've done what we can do and see God work. Do we want to see that happen? I would love to see this place get filled up with new disciples that love Jesus, but ultimately I don't want to see it just because we have amazing programs or through our own efforts. I'd like to see it because God filled this place up because He's breaking us up with the spirit of revival through the power of His Holy Spirit. And it starts with us. That to me is success. That to me is what I'm really giving my life towards. Okay? So by His Spirit, saith the Lord. He tells us how it has to be done. Now, someone reminded me yesterday of John chapter 14, verse 12, where it says that we're going to do greater works than the works of Jesus. You guys ever read that? And you say to yourself, wow. I mean, that verse still gets me today. Like, Jesus did so many amazing things. How is it that He can say that we're going to do greater works than He did? There's more of us. The miracle of a transformed life, having received the Holy Spirit, that's a great work. That's a miracle, in fact. It's supernatural. But don't we want to dismiss verses like that and say, just justify the fact that we don't see that happening sometimes? And I say that if we're in prayer and God broke our community off with His Holy Spirit and we saw revival, wouldn't that be a greater work than what Jesus did? Here's why. Because He did miracles in Tyre and Sidon, Capernaum, Bethsaida. Those cities, those communities were not transformed. Not because He couldn't have done it, but what if we, through a prayer, pleaded with our God to break our community off, and we saw a hardened community come to God in mass? That would be a greater work, would it not? In that context. So please take this seriously. It's going to be so easy this week when your stomach's rumbling, okay, to dismiss that, say, oh, it's not so important, somebody else will do it. But hey, it doesn't have to be long prayers with a bunch of these and thous, okay? Just cry out to God, ask Him specifically what you want Him to do. We want to pray God's word, God's will back to Him. Okay, so here's a few things that are on my heart, okay? And you can add to this list. You can write on the back of it. Priorities in prayer. This is what I'm asking this week. Pray the Lord will save souls in our community that we will disciple. That we will disciple. I can say a lot about that. Secondly, pray that the Lord will raise up faithful, dedicated men who will self-sacrificially go on mission. I'll be saying more about that in the days ahead. We need men in our church. Very often the church in America is mostly populated with women. And there's a lot of reasons why it's so important we reach the men. I'm going to give you some specific examples about what I'm talking about. I'm not trying to minimize the ladies. I am so grateful for the ladies of our church. By God's grace, we have some godly ladies. So I'm not trying to minimize the ladies at all, but I also like to see the men step up. And again, in the near future, I'll be giving some specific reasons why that's so pivotal, that the men not be absent, that they be committed. Thirdly, pray the Lord will stir up within the hearts of Gospel Life a passion to live out the gospel. Again, it starts with us, does it not? And as I said, the Lord never does anything aside from the prayer of His saints. It starts with us. Okay? So you, self-sacrificially, giving up time this week to pray is hugely important for the future of GL. Otherwise, I could say this. We can just pack up and go home. We could. Okay? Because where's our dependence lie? Are we satisfied with mere religion? Is religion enough for us? Because we're naturally attracted to a higher code of ethics or morals? No. No, morals aren't that awesome. They're helpful, but we're looking for something more. We're looking for the presence of God to be demonstrated in our community. Isn't that what we're about? Isn't that what we want to see? Absolutely, it starts with us. Okay. I said we're going to cover a lot of ground here this morning. Again, can I have some men to pass something out? Thank you, fellas. Oops. Here is a chart of our giving. We're trying to do this once a month. We're probably going to give this kind of chart out the second Sunday of every month because I don't want to distract us from communion, the first Sunday of every month. But here is a record of our giving to date. And one of the reasons why I want our people to have this is to be a blessing to our treasurer. Okay, one of the reasons why I want to do this is because, hey, it's a way of being accountable to our giving. Sometimes we have a tendency to think that our giving, whether we can only give a little bit, doesn't matter because what we give is so little. Now, may I remind you of the widow in the Bible that gave 2 pennies? Was that important to Jesus? You know what Jesus was doing at that time? See that missions box back there? In Israel temple, they had a box like that set up. You know what Jesus did in that story of the widow's 2 mites or 2 pennies? Thank you, sir. You know what he did? He posted up right next to that mission box, that offering box. You know what I mean? Jesus was posted up next to that offering box, and he's like just waiting, just seeing who's going to give what. And what impresses Jesus at that moment? A widow who gave 2 pennies, let's say. Why is that impressive to Jesus? Was so little because in comparison to what she had, she gave it all. How is someone who has so little able to give so much? We're going to see that in our sermon. So I'll be saying more about this, but hey, you want to know where we're giving? It can be easy for us just to assume the lights are going to be on. Now, I don't want to beat you over the head this morning with duty. Is duty attractive? Duty is something we have to do, not something we get to do oftentimes, is it not? So I want you to spend some time looking at this chart just to see where we're at. I asked Diane Scott to add on this the average giving per person. And why am I doing this? To guilt and shame you? Sometimes, I have to say this publicly, sometimes we get offering envelopes that are completely empty. They're sealed, but they're empty in the offering plate. You know what that is? That's the fear of man. Given the illusion that we're giving something when we're actually not. And why that's so foolish is because, ultimately, I don't mean to embarrass anyone this morning, but because God sees us. Can God see what's inside the envelope? No. So are we doing it for each other? Ultimately, no, we're doing it for Him. Okay? Now, the reason why I asked that the individual giving be given down here is because we're tempted sometimes to think that giving, I can give so little that it doesn't matter, so I'm going to give nothing. There are several, what Diane will call units here. That's $7 per person. And a lot of it is zero. Imagine someone that gives zero gives $1. And someone that gives $7 begins to give 10. See, right now, I don't want to be at the place as a church where we're at our baseline, meeting our basic necessities. Because guess where it gets exciting, Gospel Life? It gets exciting when we get to be generous. You know what my favorite part of getting a paycheck is? My wife getting a paycheck is? Okay, who do we get to be generous to this week? This paycheck. Who do we get to be generous to? It is awesome to be more, Jesus said it, it's more blessed to give than to receive. Do you guys know that? Do you guys have an appetite for that? Do you guys take stock, say, hey, who can I be generous to? Even if it's a little thing. And I'm not just talking about money this morning. I'm talking about time, talent, and treasure. See, we have to be a community of generous people. Generosity is not duty, it's beauty. It's beautiful. It's not duty, it's beauty. Why? Because that's who God is. He's generous. And we're called to accurately reflect out what God is like. Do we want to be a community of generous people? Is that attractive? Absolutely. If we're going to be the called out people of God, one of the essential ways we're going to reflect that out, one of the most important strategic ways, one of the ways that's easiest to see is when we're generous, not just with our money, but with our time, our talent, and our treasure. Holistically. And it's a mindset. It's a worldview. Generosity is this too this morning. I want you to get this. It's not just merely random acts of kindness. It's intentional acts of wisdom and kingdom investing. We're investing for the kingdom. I want you to get this morning. I'm going to tell you a story. There were two families living in farm country, let's say Nebraska. We'll call them the Smiths and the Joneses. Smiths and Joneses were both families active in their local church. They loved Jesus. They were Christians that were beautiful people. They both had farms, 5 kids, living pretty close to each other. The Smiths and their children had always desired to go to Disneyland. It's like, and the dad, loving his kids, desired to take his kids to Disneyland. And he says, children, if we can just get the perfect harvest one of these years, we will be able to make enough money to go to Disneyland. We will all fly out there. It'll be an amazing time making memories for our family. Is that a good desire? Yes, it is. So we have two families, the Smiths and the Joneses. So the Smiths' desire was to be able to go to Disneyland as a family vacation, make memories. So here comes that first rain. The crops were getting a little dry and it was getting a little nerve-wracking, full of anxiety. But here comes that rain. And the kids are listening to their dad as he goes out the next morning after it rained. And guess what he says? He says, perfect. That's just what we need. And they were very excited. The Smiths were very excited. Like, okay, it's looking good for the harvest this year. Let's go over and see our friends, the Joneses. And guess what, the Joneses? What happened there? The rain had stopped right on the road. It didn't enter over into their farm. And they're feeling it's a little dry there. So it's a little nerve-wracking. So the blessing that fell on the Smiths didn't fall on the Joneses. Here comes, weeks pass by, we're looking for that next rain. Hey guys, our crops, yeah, they grew up because of that first rain, but we need another one. Clouds begin to form, thunder and lightning. The Smith's farm again is drenched in rain. As a result, crops start to grow fast. And it's like, wow, okay, it's getting clear that, hey, this harvest is looking really good. Again, go over to the Joneses to rejoice. Like, hey, how's your farm going? Oh, I see Mr. Jones is on his knees looking at the soil, and you can see the look of desperation on his face. Towards the end of the season, coming close to harvest, we needed another rain. Here comes that third perfect rain. Again, on the Smith's farm, but not the Joneses. Again, a look of desperation fills the Joneses. Mr. Jones is looking at his crops, looking like it's not my crops, they're being decimated. So the Smith family sits down for a family meeting. They say, they're all excited. Like the kids are like, hey, Dad said, if we get this harvest and the perfect harvest, we're going to get to go to Disneyland. And the father says to his kids, hey, you know what? I want to keep my word, kids. I want to be able to take you to Disneyland this year. And the kids, who are good friends with the Jones children, says, hey, what about the Joneses, Dad? What about them? And they start asking questions like, hey, why was God so generous to us and not the Joneses? It's not like God was punishing them. We know they love Jesus. They're not in sin. They're good people, and God is good. He's not trying to punish them. And the kid asked a question. In fact, blurted it out in thinking through why this was happening and said this. He gave us double. Why did he give us double this year? And here came the answer. He gave us double so that we could give them half. He gave us double so we could give them half. And the kids, what they realized in that situation is that it was more exciting, more thrilling, more satisfying for them to choose to take that harvest and give it to the Joneses to help them. And more important than going to Disneyland, I'm sure sometime in the future they'd be able to go, more important than being able to go to Disneyland, that family, those children learned what it meant to be generous to another family. They learned the lesson that why God was so generous to us was not to harm and punish the Joneses. God was generous to us so that we could learn to be like Him in being generous to the Joneses. Amen. See God's grace and His mercy? See His goodness embedded in the circumstances of life? We have texts like 1 John 3:17. If someone has enough money to live well and sees a brother or sister in need but shows no compassion, how can God's love be in that person? How? So it's very easy to call ourselves Christians, but what the inspired writer is saying in 1 John 3 is he's asking a diagnostic question. They can say they're a Christian, but if you don't see the love of Jesus in their hearts for a brother, how? I'm just asking myself in curiosity, how can it be that they're a Christian? How can it be that the love of God abides in their hearts? 1 John 1:7 says, if you say you're in the light, as He is in the light, we have fellowship, we have community one with the other. And so we can ask ourselves these diagnostic questions and say, do we practice what we preach? I said before that we're praying for God to do something supernatural. And it's easy to call ourselves religious people. It's easy to call ourselves Christians. But if something supernatural hasn't happened in your heart and my heart, whereby we desire, motivated by the Spirit, to be generous to others, we need to ask ourselves, is it just religion? Is that all it is? Are we just practicing? Faking? Hypocritical. Luke 3:11, John replied, if you have 2 shirts, give one to the poor. If you have food, share it with those who are hungry. I want you to see this principle this morning. God is generous to us, not so we can hoard, but so that it can flow through us out to others to be generous like Him. Now, I want you to get to this point. We are not just trying to be generous around here for the sake of being foolish and patting ourselves on the back. Are we supposed to be wise as serpents, harmless as doves? Are we supposed to be managers, stewards who wisely invest? How many parables do we have, stories do we have that Jesus says, wisely invest? The idea of being assigned with the place given to the hypocrites, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. That statement, that phrase that shows up repeatedly in books like Matthew, is said of those who foolishly refuse to invest. I'm just trying to call ourselves out. Let's not fool ourselves thinking that generosity is optional in the life of a Christian. Now, do we realize, I said we need to be wise in our giving, okay? In Africa, since 1949, how much would you guess that Africa has received in government aid since 1949? Like America. Government aid. I'm just going to tell you, 5 million? 5 billion? 500 billion is the answer. $500 billion. Now here's the thing. Africa is now currently more impoverished than it ever has been. So what happened to all that money we're giving? Was it helpful? I'm making the point right now that it's not just that we give, but we give wisely. Are we stewards? Are we managers? Are we want to invest in something? Not just pat ourselves in the back because we threw out some money randomly, shotgun style. I'll give you an example, a horrific story I alluded to in my CG last Tuesday. Through all this time, there's generous, wealthy churches in America. And I praise God for that. And so these churches, this is a true story, okay, that was observed by a visiting missionary. Certain church group got wise to the fact that American churches were generous. And they said, hey, let's be smart about this. So what they would do is they would solicit help from churches in America. Here's the thing. They wouldn't let each of the churches they asked for help know that they had asked other churches. So each church believed that it was the only sole source of help for this particular community. And so what the church would do is the trucks would come, drop off things like numbered jerseys, expensive football jerseys for all the boys. And they would take that stuff, pack it away, hide it, so that the next day when another truck comes from another church in America, again, they're able to maintain that facade that they're the only giving church to that. They're the only generous church given to that particular church in Africa. And so throughout the week, trucks began to come. And what the observing missionary said is when he showed up later that night, what did he see? Another truck rolling up. Another truck rolling up. What was this truck rolling up for? Because they were taking the resources like these jerseys. And by the way, earlier in the day, all the boys put the jerseys on, posed for the picture for the wealthy American church back in the States. But later that night, here comes another truck. They take those jerseys off, and along with the other goods, they put them on this truck, and come to find out, they had sold all those goods and taken the money, and those boys took that money to purchase prostitutes. Now, what do we learn from that story? Is it just a matter of giving, or is it a matter of giving wisely? So we are supposed to be investors, whereby we're looking out and say, how can we most accurately reflect who God is through our generosity? That doesn't accurately reflect who God is when we give naively, because God is not able to be what? Hustled. Can we hustle God? Be not deceived, God is not mocked. So we misrepresent who God is when we just simply give without thinking. Two generous men walking down a road one day, looked on either side of the road. They see men slapping the water. And each man goes down to his side of the bank. The one man sees, hey, you're trying to catch some fish. That's what you're doing. Here's $20. Go get yourself some fish. Oh, wow, amazing. Runs back, gets some fish. Takes that money, buys a feast for his family. They eat very well that night. They eat like they haven't eaten in quite a while. The other wealthy, generous businessman goes down to his side of the shore, and guess what he does? He takes his $20 and goes and buys the man a fishing pole. Gives it to him. Sits there with him. Explains how this fishing pole works. Because before, they're trying to catch fish by hand. They didn't have any resources. The next day, they're walking down the road, and the one man who's just given out the money sees the man down there again, the same man he'd given money to the day before, slapping the water again, trying to catch some fish. The other businessman looks down and sees not only the first guy bought a fishing pole, he sees another group of guys. And the one guy is teaching the other guys about this fishing pole. And he goes back to the town, he takes the time, buys more fishing poles, gives them to this guy, keeps walking down the road. The other gentleman who had just given out the money saw several other guys, and now not only the first guy, but a group of guys saying, hey, can you give us $20 so we can go get a meal? So day in, day out, this same pattern happens, and this guy finds himself, he's having to keep giving out money. To the point where one day he wakes up, and at his front door is a crowd of people asking for a handout. Whereby the other gentleman, he kept walking down the river bank, and every time he saw people there, he'd give them a fishing pole. And not only did he give him a fishing pole, because he had taught the first gentleman how to fish, that gentleman had in turn taught the others how to fish, and so that they were able to constantly and continually supply for their families. Do we see the wisdom in that story? We don't want to just give away fish. We want to teach people how to fish. So we have a policy in place here at GL. When people come and ask for resources, what do? The first time, no questions asked. The second time, what do? We sit down with them to look at the bigger picture to make sure we actually can help them in a bigger, more substantive way. We try to do that. Sometimes these problems are big, right? And it takes, hey, let's make sure that we're not just merely enabling you. We try to never give away cash because we don't want that cash to be a temptation for someone to go out and spend it on something that could be damaging to their future. We try to be wise in our investment. Again, when we give out our CG offerings, another example, we don't want to just give out money randomly. And sometimes we do because, hey, we need to be willing to be hustled. We may take risks sometimes to give someone who may or may not be hustling, but we want to err on the side of grace, do we not? So we put ourselves at risk sometimes. But hey, ultimately, we're going to give an account for being foolish in our giving. Do we want to see fruit for our labor? So ultimately, if we have a choice between giving to something where we may never see that person again and giving to something where in the future we may have an opportunity to disciple them and tell them about the true bread of life, the true source of resources, which one are we going to choose? We have limited resources, do we not? So we're going to choose what's wiser. So we see that it's not just about giving a bunch of money, but giving wisely. It's about investing. You know, another gentleman recounts the story where he visited an Indian reservation, and America in our past was very brutal to Native Americans, were we not? So, again, I think appeasing our guilt in large part, what did we do? We placed them on an Indian reservation, and we meet all their needs. You know what the result of that is? We removed their dignity. We removed their dignity. So what happens is this man was visiting an Indian reservation. We found there were businesses, restaurants, or whatever. He found what was curious to him is that all the businesses were populated or employed by non-Native Americans. So he goes to the restaurant owner and says, yes, how long you had this restaurant? 8 years. This Mexican restaurant, yeah, it does very well for itself. It's successful. Well, why haven't you hired any Native Americans? You're on an Indian reservation. And he says, you know what? In all this time, we couldn't find anybody to work. We couldn't find Native Americans to work for us. The longest we found someone to work is 2 weeks. Because they show up, and as soon as they get their first paycheck, they're gone. Because they lost that value of working. Now I say, and you look at the alcoholism rate of that Indian reservation, have we really been generous? And was it really wise for the government to just merely give them money, meet all their needs? Did that make them better or worse in the end? It removed their dignity. See, working is not part of the curse. Working being burdensome is part of the curse. But work existed before the fall. So to remove someone's ability to work removes their dignity. We need to not just give out fish, we need to teach people how to fish. So here's the ideas of betterment versus development. Betterment says, I'm your Savior. I'm going to save you. I'm going to give you this money. Aren't I a good person? And shouldn't you continue to see yourselves as the person who's always needing help? Versus development says, I'm not above you, I'm coming alongside of you. Because guess what? You're made in the image and likeness of God. You are valuable. And I want to help you in wise ways that lift you up alongside of me as we go on mission forward together for the better of our community. We need to be wise in our giving. Acts chapter 6. The apostles commanded that 7 men full of the Spirit and wisdom, be chosen to administer the daily distribution of resources. The apostles said, hey, we need to give our time wholly to prayer, to the reading of the Word. So guess what, church? Choose for yourselves 7 men filled with the Spirit and full of wisdom to sit there at the daily distribution as we're giving out the church's resources. The church, God had done a mighty work by His Spirit, and as a result, people were living in community together, sharing all their resources, but they weren't just giving those resources out randomly. They had the wisest men they could find to sit down at the daily distribution to dole out those resources. We need to follow that example in being wise in our giving. So we have to be a community of generosity. Jesus is forming a people to reflect out what He is like, and guess what? He is generous. And this is why just showing up for worship and a worship event is not enough. We are not just planning a worship event, we are planting a church. So this requires more than just us showing up. This is not the end, it's a means to an end. It's for us to be encouraged, lifted up, equipped, so we can go out on mission throughout the rest of the week. Showing up for an hour or two on a Sunday morning is not at all what Jesus is calling us to. That is such a reduction, and therefore loses its meaning. So what kind of church do we want to be, Gospel Life? We want to be the kind that Jesus is calling us to be, and that is what? A community of givers. We must be givers of our time, our talent, and our treasure. I want you to hear this. This doesn't mean that we only give out of our abundance or when it's convenient. If we wait till it's convenient, it's not going to happen. Or at least not happen very often. Often enough for us to be known as a community of generous people. Generosity must be the rule, not the exception. We had a cleanup day after the flood, and someone looked around and said, "Where is everyone?" I said to him, "Look, you know what? I don't want to ask people who have their own flood situations to help us. Ideally, people are showing up because many hands make light work. That would take a sacrifice, wouldn't it? So beyond all of us flash mobbing the whole, hey, cleanup situation, what if we could flash mob our own cleanup situation so we could also flash mob other people's cleanup situation?" We had a men's retreat. Someone looked around and said, "Where is everyone? Where's all the men?" Us being generous is not just for our good, it's for the encouragement of others, isn't it? So we have newer guests here. And some of you, when you come into a local church, you think, "Hey, I'm the new guy." What you don't know is oftentimes is there's plenty of new people around you. And I want us to see ourselves still as a church plant. Whereby, hey, we're looking for new, fresh blood to come in here to be a part. Sometimes you walk into a church, I've experienced this, and everything's already taken care of. There's no place for you to serve. I want us to come have the identity of servant, the identity of generous person, and come and say, "Hey, how can I get planted? How can I get plugged in? How can I serve?" I want to be a part of building something. I want to be a part of a community that's known as being generous. That starts with me being generous. I want that to be our reputation. Matthew 5:42, I'm going to read a few texts just to flesh this out, and I'm going to make a point here. Matthew 5:42, give to those who ask, and don't turn away from those who want to borrow. That's part of the Sermon on the Mount. Really, Jesus? This one checks me hard all the time when people ask me for something. This is the verse that pops in my head. Give to those who ask, and don't turn away from those who want to borrow. Another translation would say, give to every man that asks of you. Now, this doesn't mean just money. It means time, talent, treasure. This doesn't mean that we give foolishly, right? Because we're called to be wise as serpents. Luke 6:30 says, give to anyone who asks. And when things are taken away from you, don't try to get them back. Psalm 112:5, good comes to those who lend money generously and conduct their business fairly. Here's a connection. Jeff Swanson is such a good example of this. To see that spiritual connection between how we spend our resources and the things that happen to us. I spent this weekend with Jeff Swanson. What continually is coming out of his mouth is making a connection between what he experiences in life and the spiritual lesson God is trying to teach him. He's constantly drawing those two together. And isn't that what this text says? Good comes to those who lend money generously and conduct their business fairly. I'm going to make a point, so I'm going somewhere. Just hold on. Colossians 3:5. So put to death the sinful earthly things lurking within you. Have nothing to do with sexual immorality, impurity, lust, and evil desires. We say, I got that covered. That's easy. Goes on to say, don't be greedy. For a greedy person is what? An idolater, worshiping the things of the world. Matthew 19:21, Jesus told him, if you want to be perfect or complete, go and sell all your possessions and give the money to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven. Then come follow me. Jesus is pointing out the fact that there's a major hurdle between him and devotion to him, and that is greed. Proverbs 11:25. I'm keying in more here with more of a focus on my point. Proverbs 11:25, the generous will prosper. Those who refresh others will themselves also be refreshed. There's the principle. Those who refresh others will themselves also be refreshed. That's where I'm going. Proverbs 19:17. If you help the poor, you are lending to who? The Lord. And He will repay you. Is God good for it? Can He afford to pay you back? He's not even having to flex. He will repay you. Now, we don't give to be repaid, do we? That's not our ultimate reason. Last week, we gave examples of places in creation that give and take, give and take. And this is because it reflects out the very nature of God who what? Exists in Trinity. Get this point. These verses are seeking our good, the ones we just read, by aligning us back with the original intention of God's creation, to receive and to give, to receive and to give. This is the cycle. This is the plan. This is the design that God originally intended for us. So we saw the example of what? We breathe in oxygen, we give out carbon dioxide. The plants take in carbon dioxide, give out oxygen. Or the vapor from the oceans rises up and forms these massive clouds that drench the land. The water flows into the rivers and tributaries, flows back out into the sea, into the ocean. Guess what? That cycle continues as that vapor goes back up into the clouds. We see a lot of different places in nature, this cycle of giving and receiving and giving, everywhere. That reflects out the very nature of the Creator Himself. The creation, even though it's fallen, still reflects out the nature of the God who made it. And that the God who made it exists in community, exists in Trinity, and for eternity past is continually and still today and for forever, all time, will be outpouring of His love for each the other, the members of the Trinity. The Father shows His love to the Son. He shows His love to the Spirit, back to the Father, to the Son, right? For all eternity past, this giving of self. This giving of self. That is the cycle. And part of us experiencing the supernatural work of God in our hearts is God wanting to restore us back to the intention of the original creation. He wants us to restore that back within us. See, our salvation is ultimately not just about us individually. God is restoring all of creation back to Himself. And that will happen in its culmination in the future when the kingdom does come, when Jesus returns back. But the church today and now is supposed to be a precursor of what is coming in the future. And what's coming in the future is very generous. So our generosity, our time, talent, treasure is just a portion, a segment, but an important portion and segment of what we're called to be out, to accurately reflect out who God is and what the future is going to hold. He's wanting to restore us back to the blessing of being givers. So what happens when we hoard our time, our talent, our treasure? Because out of fear, right, our amygdala is kicking in, not our interior cingulate, if you will, in our brains. We're afraid, and so we have a tight fist and holding on to whatever resources we have. They're mine. I'll use them for self. And that fist is so tight that it can't open enough to receive other resources from God. And we cut ourselves off from the very cycle of generosity that God is calling us into. It's not just for us. God is wanting to demonstrate what He's like to the rest of creation. He's calling us to be a part of that. We cut ourselves off from His mission when we hoard our resources. God promises in His Word. We're going to close with this in a moment. He promises us to give to us so we'll have other stuff to give to other people. Promises. Why? Because this is big picture of what He's seeking to do right now. And we're afraid oftentimes, aren't we? We're afraid to give of our time, our talent, our treasure. Well, maybe I'll be ripped off. Maybe I'll be hustled. Maybe I won't have enough for myself. Maybe it's not convenient. Not going to happen. Do you realize the most generous, some of the richest people I know are some of the most generous people I know? Some of the richest people I know are some of the most generous people I know. some of the most stable people I know. And you say this, we may say this, they are generous because they are rich. They are generous, of course, because they are rich. And I say they are rich because they are generous. Why? Because that's the cycle that God has instituted, like the law of gravity, that when people are generous, He promises in His Word to give them more resources to give. And we fight and we struggle, we hold on to a little bit we have, and we wonder why we don't have. And that struggle persists again and again and more, and in a lifetime characterized by stress on finances and money. We often have one piggy bank, and it says save. It's for saving, right? One piggy bank. We should have 3 piggy banks. Give, save, spend. Give, save, invest. Because the giving and the saving and the investing, it's all investing. It's all investing. We're supposed to take all of resources and invest it. So when we eat food, how do we draw that back to the same concept? We eat food, why? So we'll have enough strength to serve Jesus with. Everything goes back to who we're called to be as kingdom citizens, as Christians, accurately reflecting who God is. So let me get really practical with you in closing. If you are asked to I'm going to meddle a little bit, okay? You'll forgive me, okay? I'm preaching to myself, all of us. If you're asked to let someone in your community group you are not exactly comfortable with, will you welcome them warmly? Oh, I don't want to give of myself. I don't want to give up my group to this person. They're going to hijack all the conversations. Is that an opportunity to be generous, to welcome freely? I could ask you this question. Do you use your relationships to go on mission, or do you allow your relationships to isolate you from community and from others? Do you use your relationships to invite people in or to keep people out? It's not just money. It's a mindset of being generous and welcoming. If you got a call last minute to gather at the flagpole at City Hall to pray for the community because of all this devastating weather we've been having, would you come even though you were at that moment sitting at a restaurant or watching your favorite TV show? You may be asked by Jesus to give up watching that episode of your favorite TV show to be generous. You're like, whoa, now you're getting crazy. Miss my favorite I'm totally fine with being generous, but not at the expense of missing my favorite TV show. Isn't that really what gets us stuck throughout the week? Those little things keep us from being who we're called to be. Do we only participate in events or mission opportunities when we have absolutely nothing else going on? Let me check my calendar. Hold on. Oh, I'm supposed to wash my hair that night. Right? Isn't that the typical thing? We say, I got to wash my car. Oh, I have to clean the kitchen. Or there's going to be a million other things we can do, but the mindset of a generous person says, you know what? I'll figure out another time to do that. I'm not missing this opportunity to be generous with my time, my talent, or my treasure. I'm not going to miss out. Don't we let those little foxes spoil the vine? Those little things, those little distractions, we're desperately seeking for, okay, what can I do to get out of this one? Well, let me find a legitimate thing that I can actually sell or pitch to the rest of my gospel community so they don't hate me so I'm not exposed for being selfish. Right? Am I checking us yet? Checking myself. Being generous is not only good for your soul, it not only allows you to be obedient to the calling of Jesus, but it also encourages others in the gospel community. When you show up to an event or a mission opportunity and you look around and you see other people, is that encouraging to you that you're not alone, you're part of something bigger than yourself? I don't like going to church this morning. I don't feel like going to church this morning. Versus, I don't like it. I don't feel like it, but there are people there that I can serve. They need me. I have an opportunity to show them Jesus this morning. That's getting me out of bed. I'm not coming for the preaching, just the preaching. I'm not coming just because there's snacks in the back and there's coffee there. I'm not just coming because my best friend's going to be there, my favorite people are going to be there. I'm coming there because, hey, I have an opportunity. People are going to come together in the community, and I'm going to get to serve. I have a birthday party to get to right after church, but hey, you know what? I'm going to stay a little while to greet some of the guests and make them feel welcome because I know Pastor Timothy can't get to them all. Those little things. See those little things that we can do to be generous people? It's not just say, oh, you got to throw down all this money. It starts as a mindset. It's a heart issue. It's like, hey, where do I have opportunities to be a generous person and serve? You don't have any money this morning? Young people, you don't even have jobs yet, some of you. But can you be a blessing in some way, be generous in some other way? Absolutely you can. Let's get creative in our generosity. The events, the mission opportunities at Gospel Life are not just for your own personal holiness, not just for your own discipleship. They are used as far as, hey, I'm going to go there because they need my help so we can do our mission to disciple other people. No, guess what's going to happen when you're being generous? You yourself are going to be discipled. You yourself are going to be recalibrated. Our brain is switching, and it takes time. You say, well, I'm not a generous person. You know how you become a generous person? Those small little baby step decisions you make over a period of time because you are now becoming the person you will be. It starts with those small things that you keep faithful at again and again, and your brain is actually being rewired as you do that. Imagine a Home Depot store that didn't sell anything. All the trucks came in with all the stock and supplies. They didn't sell it. No, we don't want to sell the supplies. We want to make our store so big and so amazing that we have everything. And it's the most amazing Home Depot store you ever went to. But they don't sell anything. Nothing ever flows out of that store. It just comes in and they make it bigger and bigger. And it's the world's, grandest super Home Depot ever. Is that helpful? Isn't that what we do sometimes with our own resources? I just want to keep them so it's bigger and better and bigger. I build bigger storehouses. But instead, we're supposed to be a channel of resources, time, talent, treasure, out to our communities. How foolish to have a Home Depot that doesn't sell anything. We can do more. We can do so much more by pooling our resources. If we need more Bibles, if we need more tables for the community and family meals, if someone's utility bill needs to be paid, is it easier for one person to pay that and help out, or for all of us to pitch in a little bit? Someone needs help moving out of their house, and they can't afford a moving crew. Is it easier for all of us to hit that and get it done, or for a couple people to be exhausted by the end of the day? Someone needs a visit because their social worker can no longer come, and they need the mental stimulation to flourish. Nonprofits get budget cuts too, and now the social worker can no longer visit. Is it easier for one person to visit them periodically as much as they can, or for each of us to spend a little bit of time throughout the month visiting this person that needs just a little visit, just a little bit of mental stimulation? All of us. The parsonage needs repair so the church can use the rent money for mission. Is it easier for one person to do all of it, for all of us to pitch in and say, hey, what can we do? Let's just get this done. The point is, we are called to be an army, a mobilized army. We each the other are allies to each other on mission opportunities. It's so much easier. So when you get that phone call or you get that text, think of it in these terms. Hey, it's a little thing, but it's an opportunity to help my brother. It's an opportunity for me to invest for the kingdom. It's an opportunity to make it really easy to do something amazing. Can we learn to value those invitations to mission? Can we get that mindset of a generous person? I'll end with a couple things. If you're waiting for the perfect church or the perfect cause or for the perfect time, you will never give. You will never be generous, but you will live a life of selfishness and greed. If you're waiting for it to be a perfect storm or perfect whatever before you give, it's not going to happen. There's always a way to talk ourselves out of it, isn't there? The silliest things. The church is God's chosen agent of change. We have to get behind it so we can not only give here locally, but give internationally. Wouldn't it be amazing? There's some amazing mission opportunities on the foreign field. What if we could get above our baseline giving for our own utility bills and stuff so we can actually give to international missions, international missionaries that are doing amazing works? And when we watch videos of what they're doing over there and seeing lives and communities transformed, not with stupid giving, but with amazing wise giving, we get to rejoice that we get to be a part of that. Would we like to be a part of something bigger than ourselves? So it starts with us having the foresight, the wisdom to think bigger than our immediate here and now, to think we need to have an impact because us coming together as a community can do far more than we can do as individuals. Not just here in our own community, but also internationally. If you look at our budget, are we doing much internationally? Diane? Is that a little? The church in America, statistically, spends 90% of its own resources on itself. That's America Church. Are we the richest country? Not only do we have financial resources, we have intellectual resources. We have more Bible translations than anybody, more commentaries on books of the Bible, more theological dictionaries, all these resources. And then how come we're some of the least generous people oftentimes? Oftentimes it's individuals who are the most generous, not groups, not churches. How come so many times missionaries get their support from individuals, not the local church? How come so oftentimes the people coming to church and say, I don't trust the church to give it because if I give them money, they're just going to spend it on themselves to build a bigger empire, which ends up being a bigger edifice when the lead pastor dies, the personality dies. So I have to give on the side to people that I think are really good investments. Should we have that desire to give internationally as well? And it's going to happen. We're going to be able to give to some amazing things in the future when we think bigger. That $5, imagine you could turn that $5 into something that's eternal. Versus a hot and ready at Little Caesars. Now you can transfer that hot and ready to something eternal. Why? When give it to something who's truly hungry? How about giving up a cup of Starbucks? Whoa. Do we think like missionaries? Okay, I mean it. I'm going to end with this text, okay? And we're going to be done. Read this previously. We'll read it again. 2 Corinthians chapter 9, 6 through 11. These are some promises, okay? You can rest on these. When you're doubting whether or not you want to be generous, open to 2 Corinthians chapter 9, 6 through 11. This is one of the primary texts in all of the Bible on giving, especially for the New Testament church. 2 Corinthians chapter 9, beginning with verse 6. Remember this, a farmer who plants only a few seeds will get a small crop, but the one who plants generously will get a generous crop, of course. You must each decide in your heart how much to give. It doesn't just say 10% there, right? You must each decide in your heart how much to give, and don't give reluctantly or in response to pressure. I'm trying to inspire you to something beautiful this morning, not just pressure you out of guilt. I hope you know that. And don't give reluctantly or in response to pressure, for God loves a person who gives what? Cheerfully. Not I have to give, but I get to give. And God will generously provide all you need. If you're praying this week, you can put your finger on this text and pray back to God. God, you said in your word you would give generously so I can give generously. Then you will always have everything you need and plenty left over to share with others. As the scriptures say, they share freely and give generously to the poor. Their good deeds will be remembered forever. For God is the one who provides seed for the farmer and then bread to eat. In the same way, He will provide and increase your resources and then produce a great harvest of generosity in you. Yes, you will be enriched in every way so that you can always be generous. And when we take your gifts to those who need them, they will thank God. There's multiple spiritual principles in there. God promises to give you what you need to be generous to others. And I'm willing to wager that we need to step out in faith and be generous first, take that step of faith, and then comes the reward. Well, God, you promised to be generous, and as soon as I win the lottery, as soon as you bless me with that lottery money, I will be generous. Right? The burden is on us to step out in faith. Why is the burden on us? Because Jesus has already demonstrated that though the Son of Man had nowhere to lay his head, he laid down his life for the world. We're not ever going to be a community of generous people unless we plan strategically. If we plan ahead of time. One of the reasons why we want to get our budgets together as individuals, so we can plan to be givers. Plan to be generous. It takes planning and strategy. So we'll be talking more about this in community groups this week. You know where we're at. I want to rise above so we can be more generous. Not just for a bigger building, all right, so I can go to the Bahamas, secretly, of course, is so we can do more mission. There's some amazing opportunities we have, okay? All of us coming together, pulling our resources. It's going to get exciting around here. It's going to get exciting around here. Do we want God to do something amazing? Yes, we do. Do we want God to do something amazing? Yes! Yes! So this week it starts with prayer, and it starts with strategically thinking about how we're going to be generous. In fact, it starts with, after we're done with the worship event, you look around, maybe for the first time, and say, I'm going to shake someone's hand. I'm going to ask someone's name. Is that being generous? Absolutely. Small baby steps, okay? Each of us have the capacity within us, the resources available to us to be generous. I want to call the worship team up as we close in prayer.